Hello, and welcome to this on-demand pre-recorded training for GCSE Religious Studies Specifications A and B. This event will focus on explaining the amends that have been made to our D question level descriptors. I'm Susan Curry, the Religious Studies Subject Advisor. If you have any questions regarding anything covered in this training, please do get in touch with me. It's worth mentioning that there is a delegate pack included below this, which details some of the changes and contains the examples we will discuss later within this session. You can access this in the description below the YouTube video. Following our updates about the amends, our first support offering was an on-demand pre-recorded session with our chair of examiners, who introduced the changes being made and clarified some of the language. If you've not yet seen this, you can access this using the QR code on the screen or the link. Today, we'll be building on this further, focusing on the skills needed and the difference between the different levels. Following this, we have an interactive marking activity available, giving you the opportunity to practice applying the new level descriptors yourself at a time convenient for you, and then checking your interpretation against the examiner feedback. If you have any questions, you can always get in touch with me, but we are also running a standalone Q&A session on the 16th of January, where you can submit any questions in advance or within the session that you may still have. In the new year, we plan to publish a range of exemplar answers to further support your understanding of the marking expectation. Also, we'll be offering an additional paid-for mock marking and moderation service for GCSE Religious Studies, so that teachers can get their mocks marked by senior examiners or get feedback on areas of improvement in their own marking. In this session, we plan to firstly look at why we've made these amends and when they will come into effect. We'll then look specifically at the changes to the mark scheme and other changes to be aware of. We'll clarify the impact that this will have on teaching and learning and the explicit skills we'll be looking for within the evaluation answers. We'll then spend some time looking through the 4 levels and the skills found within these, before looking at some exemplar answers at each of the 4 levels. We'll then discuss some common queries and reflect again on what support that we have available for you. So we'll first discuss why these changes have been made to our D evaluation questions. Firstly, thank you for all of those who've shared their feedback with us. Pearson Edexcel are committed to listening to your feedback to ensure that we have the best exam experience possible for our students. We have heard your concerns and we've made these changes based in response to teacher and student needs. Please continue to get in touch with us with your thoughts, questions and feedback. I in particular really love speaking to teachers and finding out what your needs are in the classroom. You told us that D questions were an area of challenge and that the expectations at the top level were too challenging and that you needed further clarification on what the expectations were. We've listened to your concerns and produced further teacher training and exemplars. This did improve the marks achieved on D questions, but your feedback and our own internal analysis highlighted that this was still an area which could be improved upon. It's worth noting that our previous level descriptors did not disadvantage students in terms of the grades that they achieved, but we have listened to your concerns to improve that exam experience for students. The amendments we've made to provide a better experience for students aims to improve the accessibility, simplify the language being used, and clarify expectations for students and teachers, hopefully improving the exam experience. This clarity was something that teachers requested within their feedback. The changes have been made to ensure a more even distribution of marks across D questions. The changes to the levels should make the top levels more accessible to students. So, when will these changes come into effect? It's important to note at this point that the amended mark schemes will be used for first assessment in summer 2024. We felt like it was right to implement these changes at the earliest possible exam series to allow the benefits to be experienced by students. This should not affect teaching, so no changes need to be made by teachers. It will only affect how examiners apply the level descriptors to the answers in the summer series. Now we're going to move on to looking at the amendments that have been made to our mark scheme level descriptors. On the screen, you can see a side-by-side comparison of the old or legacy mark scheme and the newly adapted one. We will go through each level individually within this presentation, but the most distinctive changes present in the new mark scheme are the mark scheme is shorter. We've simplified language to clarify the expectations at each level, whilst maintaining a focus on the established skills of analysis, logical chains of reasoning, judgments, and appraisal. The appraisal of evidence have been removed from our level 2 and level 3 criteria and is now only required to achieve level 4. And there is a clearer definition of what analysis and judgment look like at each level. As you may have noticed on the previous slide, all mark schemes now feature this information relating to points of view below the level descriptors. This is to provide clarity as to what we expect when we refer to different points of view within the level descriptors. Points of view will always refer to arguments for and against. It also refers to the additional bullet points which may be included within the question. A question will always state that a candidate must refer to teachings from within that religion and a conclusion. It may also direct candidates to include different views within that religion, or non-religious views, or philosophical arguments, or ethical arguments. These additional bullet points will only be used where relevant to the question and where this content is included within the specification. If and only if one of these bullet points are included, examiners will be looking for this within the different points of view section in the level descriptors. A cap-in statement may appear at the bottom of the indicative content for some questions within a mark scheme. They cap or limit possible marks. Here is an example of a cap-in statement. They appear at the bottom of the indicative content and will only be used where there are 3 bullet points within the question. To refer to the religious arguments, to include a conclusion, and then that 3rd additional bullet point. The cap-in statement will relate specifically to that question. And they are called cap-in statements because they cap or present a barrier which restricts marks within a range if not achieved. So here is an example of a question and the cap-in statement that would be used within the mark scheme. This question instructs candidates to refer to different Christian points of view. So therefore, if this was not included while discussing different points of view, candidates would be capped at level 2 because they have not included enough to be able to answer the question sufficiently. In this second example, the cap-in statement is applied as it requires the candidates to consider non-religious points of view. You can see the question and the cap-in statement on the screen now. Here's another example of a question where a cap-in statement is applied. This time it relates to the need to consider philosophical arguments. And this is the final example of where a question may have a cap-in statement, and it relates to the need to consider ethical arguments within this question. As stated previously, cap-in statements are only applied where there are 3 bullet points present. This example shows that the candidate they only have 2 bullet points to consider, meaning there will be no cap-in statement applied. This approach has not changed and is the same for all level-based mark schemes, but we thought it worth reiterating that this is how examiners will approach the marking of level-based mark schemes. Examiners are looking for best fit. This means that an answer does not have to tick every box to be awarded in a particular level. Examiners are looking for which level descriptor is the most appropriate for the quality of the answer. Answers can display characteristics from more than one level. And where this happens, markers must use their professional judgment to decide which level is the most appropriate. This means that if an answer is mainly level 3, but has some characteristics of level 2, it will fit best in level 3, but it's likely to be low in level 3. Equally, if an answer is mainly level 2 but has some characteristics of level 3, it's likely that it will fit in level 2 but likely at the top. Once the level has been decided, examiners will then start at the middle mark and then move the mark up or down to find the most appropriate mark based on how well the answer meets the requirements of the level. So if an answer meets the requirements fully, examiners will award the full marks within that level. So the top mark is that in the level it's used for answers that are as good as can realistically be expected within that level. If it only barely meets the requirements of the level, examiners will award marks at the bottom of the level. The bottom mark in the level is used for answers that are the weakest that you would expect within that level. The middle marks of the level are used for answers that have a reasonable match to the descriptor. This might represent a balance between some characteristics of the level that are fully met and others that are only barely met. So there are some other small changes that are useful to be aware of. As we've amended our level descriptors for evaluate questions, we've also updated the definition of evaluate in line with those changes. So this will be available on any of our documentation that refers to the taxonomy of command words. Additionally, there's been a very slight change to the wording of D-item questions, again for purposes of clarity. Where in the past the question read, in your response you should, it now reads, in your response you must. This does not change the intended expectations for students. However, the term clarifies that it is not an optional requirement, clarifies that expectation for students. So what implication do these amends have on teaching within your classroom? It shouldn't affect the way you teach at all. As the content and skills required in this question remain unchanged, this should not affect your teaching or the way you prepare your students for their exams. Throughout the development, we've been focused on making these changes to lead to the best student exam experience without affecting teaching. The skills required within D evaluation questions remain consistent. The amends clarify what these skills will look like at different levels and how examiners award marks. Therefore, there is no need to adapt the way you teach or prepare students for the exams. We're now going to look at these explicit skills and how these would look at different levels. So skills within D evaluation questions are AO2, Assessment Objective 2, focusing on analysis and evaluation. Students need to analyse the statement and their religious arguments. They need to explain these, demonstrating their knowledge and understanding of the religion in question. They need to make judgments in relation to the question. At level 4, they need to appraise the arguments to help establish their judgments. And they need to provide a conclusion which answers the question and considers the arguments that they have made. We've clarified the different skills expected and how they progress across the levels. Analysis moves from superficial, with undeveloped simple points at level 1, to a sustained and coherent analysis demonstrated through logical chains of reasoning at level 4. At level 1, candidates may only show an isolated understanding, whereas the answers at level 4 will demonstrate that the candidate has a thorough understanding of the material discussed. At level 1, candidates will assert basic judgments as opinions that don't link to the arguments, whereas at level 4, these judgments made in relation to the question will be reasoned and shown through the analysis and supported by the appraisal of those arguments. Where a conclusion might not be present at level 4, where a conclusion may not be present in level 1, at level 4 we will expect these to be justified based on the judgments and appraisal made within the answer and consistent with the analysis made throughout. So let's take a look at each of these skills in more detail. So what is analysis? Well, students are deconstructing issues when they are unpicking the statement, considering which arguments for and against to include, since they're breaking down the issue into those arguments. They are analysing religious beliefs and teachings studied to select the relevant ones to include, to apply. They're breaking down the information in relation to the statement. When constructing logical chains of reasoning, students are breaking an issue into parts and showing how they are connected. So a chain will involve the connections between each of the sentences within the explanation. And students are making connections when underpinning their discussion with their understanding of religion and belief to show how, for example, religious teachings can be used to support views for or against the statement. So the analysis really does demonstrate the student's level of understanding. The explanation of the process of analysis, as we've said, demonstrates that understanding. How well they explain it is what we use to understand whether they know what they're talking about. So as part of the analysis, a candidate might include an argument with a simple reason without including additional detail. The example on screen now shows one reason given without any additional explanation, examples, sources of wisdom or detail. It is an undeveloped argument, that's the one on the left. As part of the analysis, a candidate might include an argument with a reason followed by a simple development, a developed argument. So this might include further explanation, examples, sources of wisdom, or additional detail which links to the original reason and shows a greater level of understanding. The example on screen now in the middle shows one developed reason. So the original reason has been supported by teachings from the Prophet Muhammad to clarify the original reason made. The reason and the development have been linked together using the connection this can be seen in. They're not isolated sentences. A logical chain of reasoning is an argument with a reason supported by chains of development linked together, or some people might call it a well-developed point. The layers of development might include further explanations, examples, sources of wisdom, or additional detail. But in a chain of reasoning, they are clearly linked together. So the example on the screen on the right shows a logical chain of reasoning. The developed reason has been further developed with additional explanation in relation to the question. So these examples are included to show how logical chains of reasoning can be built up, but they do not provide a one-size-fits-all formula to answering a question. So let's focus a little bit more on these logical chains of reasoning. So a logical chain of reasoning is just a chain of development, chain of explanation. It involves breaking down the religious information, explaining it, showing connections between links within the chain, the example, the explanation, the source of wisdom, and back to the stimulus, that statement at the start. This building up of an argument demonstrates the analysis the student is doing and helps to avoid jumping to a judgment or an assertion without showing how it was arrived at. So a logical chain of reasoning can vary in length. with as few as 3 links at a very basic chain of reasoning to a much more extended explanation. It's not how many reasons are given, it's often the explanation that's the important part. So here is an example of a more extended logical chain of reasoning, part of an answer. It demonstrates a sustained and coherent analysis of the statement through this logical chain of reasoning. It demonstrates that the candidate has a thorough understanding of the arguments that they've presented. The connectives, or those links I've emboldened, link that chain together, they link their explanation. And it demonstrates the candidate's thought process throughout their analysis and how it links back to the statement. A judgment is the part of the answer that answers the question. Judgments are often part of the analysis, but they ensure that the analysis links to that statement. A basic judgment may assert an opinion or give a basic reason for an opinion about the statement. A reasoned judgment is directed to the statement and supported by the analysis and the appraisal completed. It responds to the question with the information they have. So a strong logical chain of reasoning may have judgments throughout it, constantly linking back the content to that statement. The first example shows a judgment that has been asserted, followed by a Muslim belief. They're not linked together at all. The second example includes a simple judgment with a link to the analysis. When judgments are reasoned, they are linked to the chains of reasoning within the analysis. The analysis may demonstrate the judgment given, or the analysis could lead to a judgment, but the judgment is shown through clear focus on the question throughout. Where judgments are supported by the appraisal of arguments, the validity, the importance of the arguments presented are considered in relation to the statement, as can be seen in the example. Again, it's worth noting that these examples have been included to demonstrate how judgments link to the analysis, but there is no one-size-fits-all formula to creating judgments, and examiners will use a best fit approach and not look for a particular formula. So this question we get asked a lot: what is appraisal? Well, appraisal of arguments, firstly, it's now only present in level 4. Appraisal involves looking at the validity or the importance of arguments and evidence made and consider their value within the discussion of the issue. It's about weighing up those arguments presented, considering whether they are authoritative, whether they're valid, whether they're important, whether they're successful in relation to the issue. And it goes beyond just presenting different viewpoints, but actually engages with the material. This then leads to the overall conclusion, weighing up the arguments before coming to a final judgment and stating why that judgment has been made. So this was taken from one of our examiner reports in the summer, and our principal examiner gives some guidance on what appraisal looks like within our Hinduism paper. As is mentioned, we often see candidates who know that they have to appraise, but simply say this is strong, as many people believe it, without actually engaging with the reasons in relation to the question. This is the example we showed earlier, which shows reasoned judgments supported by the appraisal of arguments. As you can see, the appraisal is tied to the analysis, and it explains why this argument is important in relation to the question. A conclusion acts as the overall judgment, often tying the answer together. They should not include new information, but should consider the different arguments that have been made, the value they offer to the question, and come to a final judgment. They often come in the final paragraph, but they can come at any point, and examiners will be looking for these wherever in the answer that they are present. There's no recommended length for conclusions. Some include mini conclusions throughout, or a thesis at the start, or some include them just at the end. So here's an example of a conclusion that brings together previous elements of the answer given and reaches a fully justified conclusion. Their overall judgment is supported by the appraisal of evidence. So we're now going to have a look at each level descriptor in an example of an answer at each level. So at level 1, examiners are typically looking for a superficial analysis of the statement that will largely use undeveloped arguments. The arguments that they give are underpinned by isolated elements of understanding of religion and belief. Their understanding won't be that clear. They may assert judgments and give opinions, but without clear links to the analysis of the arguments. So this answer achieved level 1, 2 marks. So you might want to pause here to give yourself a moment to read through it. So it superficially analyses religious arguments in relation to the question. The candidates analyse the statement and some religious content, and they have selected some relevant information to include. They've analysed one point of view only regarding the purpose of a Muslim's life, and have included some brief development of points. The brief analysis is underpinned by isolated elements of understanding about the practice of Salah. What is written shows quite an isolated knowledge of Muslim beliefs. It's not clear that the candidate has a depth of understanding. A judgment is asserted in relation to the question, but without clear links to the reasons given within the analysis. So this answer needed to further develop some of those points being made to show their understanding in relation to the question. Explaining points such as how praying to become closer to Allah links to life after death and to the question. And also they needed to include a different point of view within that. At level 2, examiners are typically looking for a basic analysis that uses some developed arguments which discuss different points of view to the statement. This analysis will show a limited understanding of religion and belief. Typically, they'll include some simple judgments which have some links to the analysis. The judgments will lead to a conclusion which has some limited justification and reasoning. So on the screen, this answer runs over 2 slides, but we also have it in your delegate pack to read through. So feel free to pause to read through it before I go through the explanation of what mark it got. So this answer achieved level 2, 6 marks. It includes basic analysis of religious arguments in relation to the question, which does consider some different Hindu points of view. The analysis includes some developed arguments. In the first paragraph includes a logical chain of reasoning with some layers of development within it. The student adds explanation to their points within their analysis. So the analysis is underpinned by limited understanding. They use some key Hindu terms and ideas, and some appropriate points are made, but the connections made between their explanation demonstrate an unclear understanding at times. So for example, when they say Brahman made everything, so that everything is just meant to be this way, it's not clearly explained. Judgments are asserted in relation to the question, but they can be quite repetitive. You can see that this student has been trained to link the point back, but it doesn't actually add anything to the analysis. A conclusion is included, which refers to a source of authority, but it largely just repeats what's already been said in the answer. It includes limited justification as to the reasons for why they've come to their final judgment. So this answer really needed to further explain some of those points made in relation to the question. So how are instincts Brahman's way of protecting us? How does Brahman being in all lead to us achieving moksha? Some of those clarity would really show their understanding further. At level 3, examiners are typically looking for a good analysis using logical chains of reasoning to discuss different points of view. They generally select information and explain it in relation to the statement, ensuring development is linked together and to the statement. The analysis will demonstrate that the candidate has a sound understanding of the material they're discussing. The analysis typically leads to reasoned judgments, which are clearly linked to the analysis of the arguments made. And these will then lead to a conclusion which might be partially justified. So it's not always clear how the final judgment was formed. Again, this is a best fit approach. So here's an example of a level 3 answer. This goes across 2 slides, but again, it's in your delegate pack to read through. So this is the first slide, and this is the second slide. So this answer achieved level 3, 9 marks. It offers a good analysis of well-selected religious arguments focused on the question, addressing different points of view. The analysis involves breaking down the religious information they know, selecting the relevant bits, and explaining it in relation to the question. Logical chains of reasoning are used to build up and explain the religious arguments presented. Arguments presented are grounded in religious beliefs, with useful reference made to sources of wisdom. The analysis is underpinned by a sound knowledge and understanding, which is evident through the selection of relevant material and the explanations given. The analysis of religious arguments links to some reasoned judgments which are focused on the question. Their analysis within their answer provides a judgment to the statement. There's an attempt to appraise some of the arguments given, considering arguments in relation to evidence from the Quran. A conclusion is included, which refers to the arguments being consistent with the Quran, but then it largely repeats points made within the analysis. So really, this answer needed to further clarify some of those benefits of completing good deeds and explain why this may instead be considered a goal for Muslims. They also need to use their conclusion to weigh up the arguments being made rather than repeat points. The conclusion provides an opportunity to consider the convincingness of the arguments that have been analysed and explain why one final judgment was made. So at level 4, examiners are typically looking for a sustained and coherent analysis throughout the answers, which use logical chains of reasoning as part of the analysis to discuss different points of view. The analysis demonstrates a thorough understanding of the material through their explanation and through the selection of material. The analysis leads to reasoned judgments in relation to the question, and typically supported by the appraisal of the arguments in relation to the question. This leads to a conclusion which is consistent with the analysis. It's also worth noting that a level 4 answer does not need to be perfect. We're looking for the best fit. So this answer runs over 3 slides. Again, it's available in your delegate pack to read through. So this is the first slide. This is the second slide. And this is the third. So pause at any point to give yourself an opportunity to read through this. So this answer achieved level 4, 11 marks, because it presents a sustained and coherent analysis of well-selected religious arguments focused on the statement. Different points of view are examined and explained. Explanations of religious arguments are given through logical chains of reasoning, demonstrating the understanding of the arguments given. The analysis is underpinned by a thorough knowledge and understanding, demonstrated through the inclusion of useful, well-explained examples and reasons. It's really clear that the candidate has a confident understanding of the material that they're using within their answer. The analysis of religious arguments leads to those reasoned judgments, which are focused on the question, including some appraisal of the logic of the answer, but this is mostly at the end of the answer. A conclusion is used to appraise the arguments and weigh them up, which leads to a final judgment in relation to the question. The conclusion flows from the analysis and pulls the answer together. To improve, this answer needed to ensure that the rationale for the appraisal comments on the reasons for the answer being valid, rather than repeating the reasons given within the analysis of the argument. I'd also recommend appraising throughout rather than just in the conclusion, especially if you're concerned about timing. So hopefully that has given you some insight into how the different levels will be applied. So since announcing these amends, we've received a number of completely understandable queries about grade boundaries in the summer. So I published a subject update which explains how grade boundaries are set and what this will mean for summer 2024, which you can access by using the QR code on screen or using the link below that. It's important to note that grade boundaries are set each exam series, and each paper within the qualification has different boundaries. Now, these vary each year, and that's done in order to maintain standards and ensure that the same quality of work is awarded the same grades regardless of the exam series that the student sat that in. So the process ensures that grades are comparable across exam series and across exam boards, so that, for example, a grade 7 has the same value. We do expect that these changes will have an impact on marks achieved, but we can't predict how students will perform in A, B, C or D questions on each of the different sections of the paper. So due to this, we cannot predict what grade boundaries for each different paper will be for summer 2024. Although these changes may impact the marks students get, they will not affect the grades that students achieve. The systems that we have in place as part of the assessment awarding process ensures that standards are maintained across exam series, and our senior examining team will look to ensure that a grade 7 quality exam script, as with all other grades, will achieve a grade 7, regardless of the exam series sat. This process will ensure that students will be awarded the grades that they deserve, regardless of which exam series they sit their paper in. We do understand that you want to understand this new standard that will be used by examiners in the summer 2024 exam series. So to support you, we've offered a range of support as mentioned earlier. Our interactive marking activity, opportunities to ask questions, additional exemplar answers, and our mock marking and moderation service. So these tools should help you to fully understand these new level descriptors. We understand that grade boundaries are often used by teachers to support accurate predictions, but there is unfortunately no way to predict these accurately for summer 2024. Grade boundaries should be used in conjunction with their associated exam papers. So if you're using a particular past paper, you should use these with the accompanying past mark schemes and grade boundaries. Using past mark schemes and past grade boundaries will not disadvantage students or the predictions that you make for them due to the systems in place to ensure students will get the grades they deserve. So what further support is going to be available? Now, we've mentioned some of these earlier, but it's worth us commenting on them again. On screen is some further information about those. We hope you find this session useful. As mentioned earlier, following this, there will be additional support to help you understand these amends. If you have any questions in advance of our Q&A session in January, you can submit those in advance via the following link or QR code. As always, you can always contact me as well with your questions. If you don't want to wait till January, you can email me or you can book a Teams meeting to discuss some of these queries with me.